Hello. Today, I'm going to be reimagining performer Rivers Are Blues' 2025 performance, Rivers' Watermelon Recap, in which they recounted some key points from week 4 of Dr. William Lewis's Theater 48400 class while hunched over their bathtub cutting a watermelon. Blues since denies any creative intent in the first instance of the piece, other than needing to cut the watermelon before it went bad and needing to film their blog post, all within the last 30 or so minutes of the day. Today, I aim to give some further understanding as to a cultural and historical basis for the initial piece, while in the meantime delivering my final portfolio for Theater 4400, where I will delineate what has brought us to this point in the history and in the symbiotic progressions of media and performance, how technology has willingly or not played a hand in it, and what we as a culture can expect to see or perhaps will to be in the future. And I will be doing it all while cutting a bag of potatoes. Now, I took a second to go ahead and rinse those potatoes before I started cutting them, because food safety is very important to me, a freshly 20-year-old who still observes the 5, 15, and even 30-second rule. Now, as previously stated, Rivers Are Blue denies any true reasoning for the first performance of Watermelon Recap, from here on shortened as Watermelon Recap or RWR, other than necessity and, admittedly, the amusement at the concept helping to motivate them get both tasks done. However, that does not mean this performance exists in a vacuum. Yes, it was only viewed by two people, to my knowledge, the one making it and the one who it was turned into. That's you. But preceding it are two long lineages of genre defining content, and a much more recent trend of content which can be seen as a clear referent for Watermelon Recap. First, there's food and cooking related content. Performative cooking, and by performative I simply mean cooking for an audience, has existed long before TV, often for instructional purposes. The most notable one being the radio show The Betty Crocker Cooking School of the Air, which debuted in 1924. There are also live cooking demonstrations still held today, which could be held either as a public service or to promote a certain product. All this to say, performative cooking is a core style of performance. There's also the type of performance I'd like to classify as performative commentary. This is admittedly a fairly wide net to cast, as it essentially involves any displaying of a stance or opinion, but I think it's important here to involve it because it's what differentiates Watermelon Recap and its sibling pieces from performative cooking. See, in the past couple years online, specifically on online short form video social media, there was a large wave of people, largely men, who would set up a camera and talk about something unrelated while they did some amount of food prep. It would almost seem like they were using the food prep as a method of showing that the content was casual in nature, that these were organic thoughts they were having and just felt the sudden urge to share right then and there. This, though unintentionally, positions Watermelon Recap as being in direct conversation with that movement and subverts it, in a way. By reversing the process, injecting performative cooking into an assignment of performative commentary instead of the reverse, flouts typical perceptions of professionalism, academia, and relevancy to highlight the fact that the life of a college student is hectic and messy, like cutting a watermelon in your bathtub with a dull knife. So, what does all of this have to do with the guidelines of the portfolio? At the time of making this, I don't entirely know. I have vague notions, but nothing that concrete. What I have done, though, is shown how Watermelon Recap, and by extension this very piece now, are both in conversation with the larger cultural narrative. And I'll continue on that more later, I promise. First, I want to make sure we're clear on the definitions of a few key terms. First is performance. Now, think about what a traditional idea of performance looked like in the 1930s. I myself picture a large concert hall or a playhouse with a bunch of audience members all watching a person or an orchestra perform a piece. I see a script, and I see performers who have pre programmed themselves to follow that script. Now, to the average person, if you boil down the term performance, what they will think of is a person on a platform. Doesn't matter how big, it could be for one person, it could be for a million, or it could be for no one but themselves. That person on that platform is performing in some way. Could be on a TV screen, a stage for a concert or a play, a movie, or even in a mirror. By engaging in algorithmic technology like social media, that person is performing even by not publicly posting anything. By liking, saving, sharing, even by how long they stay lingering on a piece of content, they are performing a version of themselves which the algorithm must attempt to decipher and understand to see how to best augment that performance. In theory, this is all voluntary, right? You purchase the device, you download the app, you put in your information, and you agree with the platform's terms and conditions. But by the lack of transparency we're seeing from tech companies about their terms and conditions and about the new practices they're implementing, we're seeing a type of performance where the average person isn't even necessarily aware of the fact that they are performing, which means that now the act of being becomes an act in more than one way. not just an action, but an action with an audience, a performance. Next is media. Now think about media. You may be thinking of media as created content, such as movies, TV, or music in all its various mediums. Or you may be thinking of media in the form of information, print media, news media, the media. Well, I think that neither are exclusive. Fox News says in open court that it doesn't have to be bound to the truth because it's entertainment, not news. And nowadays, it seems that the last bastion of hope for free speech and honoring truth in America is late night TV. The point I'm trying to make is that it's all entertainment. It's all trying to convey some information. The truth is really kind of irrelevant because it's about getting the viewer to believe something. That's what media is, a piece of information being displayed through various mediums. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have to try and define technology. I know this isn't in the outlines, but it's so intrinsic to how both media and performance work, I just couldn't help myself. Now, we talked plenty in class about how what we think of as technology is really more of a marker of progress than an actual true categorization. To us nowadays, the written word doesn't actually seem like technology, but at one point it was newfangled and fresh for a caveman to smash berries against a wall and smear a collection of symbols that communicate how he felt about that week's hunt. And nowadays, it gets to seem like everything is technology. I get up off of my engineered mattress and bed frame, stand in my room, which was built by a team of architects, builders, and tradesmen, put on my glasses, which were invented by someone hundreds of years ago, and turn off my alarm on my phone, which was created through a process a lot of us would frankly rather not think about. When specifically talking about iDevices and communication technology such as the internet, though, they've allowed us an amazing opportunity to connect with people all across the world who we formerly would have had to invest great time and resources into reaching them, and who may have even had to do so individually, which would have taken forever. But these technologies, after becoming essentially cyborgic extensions of ourselves, turned into vampiric little leeches. There's something called the confrontation effect. It comes from a study done last November, which showed that people may be more likely to negatively engage with content which does not align with their ideals than they are to positively engage with content which does. Emotionally or politically charged content drives engagement through this effect, which then boosts its position in the algorithm, and the cycle continues. Plenty of people have caught on to this, but it doesn't stop the effect from manifesting itself. And this largely has to do with the fact that social media companies recognize this effect and the effect it's having on people by showing people polarizing content to further push them to take up a side, grow more divided, and they don't care. In fact, they basically encourage it. In 2021, Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen testified that in her time at Facebook, quote, she saw that Facebook repeatedly encountered conflicts between its own profits and our safety. Facebook consistently resolved those conflicts in favor of its own profits. She goes on to say that all the negatives that are assumed from amplifying negative content, the violence, the division, the self hatred in some cases, all had been repeatedly confirmed to be the effect of this amplification by internal research at Facebook. They know about it and they don't care. I'm going to back up a bit now and talk about the general evolution of performance media and technology over the years. And from those past few sections, you may be saying, Rivers, all those definitions you just gave are broad, vague, and don't really do much to tell us what they actually are. Boy, nothing gets past you, huh? Well, in a way, you're right. But these are very broad terms, and the less prescriptive we try and be about what falls into certain categories and what we deem to be theater and all that, the more we're going to be able to treat new or different ideas fairly. Trying to define these concepts so rigidly only restricts the potential that we have to create and redefine our own lives through new iterations within these concepts. After all, these things are constantly changing. In Opera Cross Borders, New Technologies in Mediatization, Lama Milena Bartkiewicz comments on the fact that mediatized opera performances, like the Met puts on and sends out to movie theaters, are really only seen as surrogate by those who have the means to view the performances live. The values we place on certain aspects of performance are always changing due to the changing landscape of media availability, so we need to remove this idea that any one aspect is intrinsic to the art of performance. And in the past 5 years, our entire perception of liveness and presence, thought to be the one thing separating theater from everything else, has changed completely. Naomi Bennett has explored a concept in her research called virtual touch, where non tactile senses are affected in a way that causes a physical sensory response. And this phenomenon has been experienced in performance before. In 1994, with Paul Sermon's telematic dreaming, for one. In it, participants would lay on a plain white bed where a performer's image would be projected onto it next to them. And people did report feeling a physical stimuli from just the visual effect of seeing someone in bed with them close enough through this screen that our sense of touch is activated. And this was all the way back in 1994. Think of it now that we spend most of our days interacting with screens. It's impossible to imagine what this effect could be like now. See, when these technologies become such an extension of ourselves, doesn't the connection to another person through an iDevice mean that they're present with you? We're getting to connect with people in real time from across continents, especially when we're still recovering from a time where being with a group of people in person had real consequences. If you're getting to interact with someone in real time, what's not live about that? So, back to what I was saying. When did all of this start really coming into view? Well, it's not like before we were all putting on plays and acting like the young fish in that David Foster Wallace anecdote, going, "What the hell's water?" But the part of history most important to what we're discussing starts in the 20th century. See, in the wake of the Industrial Revolution and on the cusp of the First World War, there were a number of avant garde movements sparked from the wildly changing socio political landscapes of the time. Futurism, Dada, Surrealism, these were all about challenging the norms, embracing experimentation. Everything they knew about the world was changing. So why not try to channel some of that change into art and performance? And in some cases, like with Dada especially, it was born out of the systems of production they had in place not being adequate enough for them to grapple with the realities of the world they were now faced with during World War I. So performance making processes had to be expanded to account for that. Historically, this has been how performance and media have developed with each other. Advancements in technology will come, advancements in communication technology, radio, movies, TV, DVDs, CD-ROMs, even advancements in performance technology, lighting, sound, projection, robotics, automation, animatronics. Creators begin to experiment with performance as a response to these developments, start to see how they can be used, stretch the applications of them, and every now and then something would catch on enough that it would get brought into the mainstream and becomes part of the status quo. Counterculture becomes culture. Warhol, MTV, punk rock, computer generated content. But ever since the internet, and especially since media sharing networks like YouTube, the whole process was democratized. People didn't have to appeal to corporate sponsors or compromise on their work to get it seen. They had an open field to post onto, and it was equal opportunity. If you got more views, more likes, you got pushed onto the front page, which meant more people would see it. These online platforms for sharing media, for sharing performance, would become amazing breeding grounds for new experimental work. And people could reply to these pieces by taking qualities from them and their processes and making their own works, creating something truly conversational. And then, after investors started to see how much traction these sites were getting, the monetization begins, the commodification, if you will. Ads begin to crop up, and sponsors, they start to want certain things, and it becomes more about chasing engagement than about sharing, about connection. And then there are waves of censorship, of crackdowns, DMCA strikes. That's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. Originally built to crack down on internet piracy platforms like Napster or LimeWire, it starts to get used by big media conglomerates to go after creators indiscriminately, taking down people who are just trying to reinterpret or engage with pre existing works and add something to the dialogue. People using copywritten music or clips from movies, even if within fair use, get taken down and struggle like hell to get it put back up. The same thing happened with social media. Money starts to come into the equation and it stops being as simple as connecting with other people. Now it's about engagement time and how long people are staying on the site, how to keep them on the platform as long as possible, and how to get their money. But is that the fault of the technology? Now, I want to talk about Marx for a second. In his essay Marx on Technology, Andy Merrifield displays Marx's insight into how technology was co opted by capitalistic forces and turned against workers. He said that, quote, the lightening of any labor turns into, now quoting Marx, an instrument of torture, since the machine does not free the worker from work, but rather deprives the work itself of all content. Instead of learning the skill and being able to take pride in that job, however subjugated you may be in the structure, you end up clocking into the push buttons factory for 8 hours a day. And you don't get to develop. You end up stuck in that position because you have no skills to shop around and find gainful employment with. And the employment you have is so mind numbing that you become dull to the pleasures of life. It's so easy and nothing burger that you go insane because the work gets easier and more can get done, but you become so stagnant and you're spending the same amount of time there because autonomy is being taken away from you. He goes on to reiterate that this is not from the ontological properties of the machine, but instead, quoting Marx's Capital directly, out of their capitalist application. Therefore, since machinery itself shortens the hours of labor, but when employed by capital it lengthens them, Since in itself it lightens labor, but when employed by capital it heightens its intensity. Since in itself it is a victory of man over the forces of nature, but in the hands of capital it makes man the slave of these forces. Since in itself it increases the wealth of the producers, but in the hands of capital it makes them paupers. This is exactly the issue. The capitalistic applications of recent developments in algorithmic and AI technologies have shown exactly what Marx is speaking on here. The ideal that AI would be able to free up mundane busy work from people and allow them to work on more meaningful projects instead is not showing to be the case. Instead of workers getting to work less hours but maintain wages, corporations are cleaving off employees by the thousands and citing AI. According to the LA Times, nearly 50,000 jobs laid off this year have been cited as being due to AI, allowing corporations to grow their efficiency and reduce hiring. Instead of using technology as a launching point for providing more meaningful opportunities, workers are getting kicked to the curb. People see this and it frustrates them, and they start to see technology as a cause of this. Now, I've got a bit of a case study for you. In a frustrated review of Annie Dorson's 2013 piece, A Piece of Work, A Machine Made Hamlet, reviewer Gemma Alex Levy says that she perceives it to be Annie Dorson's goal to frustrate or disappoint the audience in creating an algorithmically driven restructuring of Hamlet, and likens Dorson's use of Markov chains to create the script to absurdism. However, Levy seems very frustrated by the fact that, quote, with no humans to provide emotion, the production lacked the intensity and urgency that makes absurdism compelling. She adds that if the aim was to, quote, question the creation of meaning, then why use Hamlet? She questions why Dorson has taken something which already holds meaning for people and attempts to get them to create a meaning out of it, which is at least somewhat devoid of their previously held meanings of Hamlet. This was 12 years ago, and interestingly, we're hearing very similar arguments being lodged against AI usage and performance today. Whew, this is getting tough. I need a cigarette. Smoke 'em if you got 'em. But what separates Dorson's use of algorithms in 2013 with the use of algorithms in 2025? Well, personally, what I find permissible about Dorson's piece is that it's not using anything in a plagiaristic way. It's essentially hitting a button to randomize the sequence of letters or words in certain parts of Hamlet, and the rest has been created to augment the script that Dorson created using it. Levy also states that Dorson's computer generated voices delivering the script in the first of 5 parts feels irritating, calling them comical stereotypes. In fact, a large point that seems to frustrate Levy is the lack of human actors on stage delivering the material for all but one part of the performance. And this could be for a few reasons, but I think it goes into the same thing I was just talking about with Marx's concepts. People perceive a lack of human presence where they would expect to see it, and they draw a conclusion that it means that someone has lost out on an opportunity that would have otherwise been there. They feel deprived on behalf of their fellow humans, but the problem is that they're blaming technology for that instead of finding where the root issue is. See, Miriam Felton Dansky and Jacob Gallagher Ross have this term, interface theater. It encompasses pieces which are helping to, in their words, quote, create new theatrical languages to embody the new lived realities of surveillance capitalism. These works depict and critically reflect upon a world pervasively mediated by interfaces. They go on to say that these works are allowing the participant or viewer a glimpse into how these algorithms view them and how it's putting them into these boxes or casting them in new roles. It even goes on to say that one big piece, Big Art Group's Opacity from 2017, quote, reminds us of the doubled theatricality of surveillance capitalism itself. Although we might seem to be safe in the dark, enjoying the hallowed public privacy of theatrical audiences, we're also being watched, and something will be done with the results of that watching. We're all sitting together, but to the devices surveilling us, even as we, in turn, watch the performance unfolding before us, we're alone, independently generating data, personalized and atomized. The temporary community of the theater auditorium is being sundered apart in real time and recombined by data aggregators that can't account for its existence. The gathering of spectators in an auditorium, a temporary community united by public privacy, is a form of corporate body that algorithms cannot see, at least meaningfully. A volitional gathering of bodies united by common attention and common concern, combining privacy and togetherness, community and solitude, common experience and subjective interpretation. End quote. That is the position that we are in today. We are constantly viewing performance and digesting media, and we are constantly performing and producing media. In Game Design as Narrative Architecture, Henry Jenkins says that, quote, increasingly we inhabit a world of transmedia storytelling, one that depends less on each individual work being self-sufficient than on each work contributing to a larger narrative economy. I think this is at the core of what I'm trying to get at here. Media and performance are becoming less individualistic. It's impossible to be completely individualistic because there is nothing individual and there is nothing original. Self sufficiency is not the answer to a long and healthy lifestyle. It's about how you influence others, how you have been influenced. And when I say you, I include each and every byte of personal data, its own piece of media in itself, because at this point, a person can be viewed at by a tech company as simply a synecdoche of their entire user database. You can represent everyone age 22 who listens to Matchbox 20, and everyone who listens to Matchbox 20 and is 22 years old can represent you. The processes we've gone through as a society, the mediatization, the digitization, and the datafication, we may think they're taking us further apart, but really they're bringing us together. Through the combination of media and performance, we can look at things that we don't usually want to look at or that we would never get a chance to look at before. It allows us a buffer in some ways and allows us a way to communicate with each other in a way that feels comfortable. The trouble is when it's used to make us numb. In The Work of Art in the Age of Digital Commodification by Annie Dorson and Sam Gill, which is an absolutely brilliant piece, and you should read it if you haven't, because I think it says so many of the things I'm trying to say, but better. And I have to include a bunch more sources, so I can't just read it to you. But, anyways, in the section on generative AI, she goes through the ways that the applications of generative AI are following the process Marx purports, saying that, quote, generative artificial intelligence does not amplify or augment or extend or approximate human creativity. It modifies human productivity. She then likens it to assembly line work, which certainly helps maximize output, but does nothing to amplify human expression. It creates content. There are systems which have been in place for so long, we don't recognize sometimes that things could be any different. The same is true in performance. Those who haven't gotten to experience a performance not shackled by Aristotelian or otherwise traditional notions that any one aspect of the performance is sacred or above all others may not realize that there are options, or that we may be looking at things wrong. We as a society, or to be a bit clearer, as a proletariat, have been undergoing a process of separation for some time now. The decline in urbanization, the gentrification of what once were massive hubs of working class innovation and creativity into stomping grounds of QR code menus and WeWork spaces and hostile architecture. It's so clear that there is an attempt to turn technology against us. What I think is important to understand is that the processes we've experienced through technological innovation are not the same as the processes which aim to separate and divide, to isolate us as individuals. Data conglomerates want to find out if you like Matchbox 20 to develop a clearer profile of who you are as an individual and weaponize that data to consume your attention. Whereas you making the choice to follow accounts that post using hashtag Matchbox 20, or you posting your own cover of Push to the Matchbox 20 subreddit, which has about 1,000 weekly visitors, could lead you to make stronger connections with other people. If you truly had control over your own algorithm, we would not be having these problems. Those with the power and money to develop this technology want us to fear it, to think it could ever replace us, but that is not true. This technology is being abused in the same way these companies abuse their workers. We think AI is bad because we see it as analog to corporations, faceless entities which fail to answer for their actions, to give reasons for why they do what they do. But these technologies fail to answer for their actions because they are not at fault. They are being scapegoated in the same way so many others have been in the past to distract you from the fact that right now there are real people programming it to boost divisive content to increase negative reactions because negative reactions boost engagement. I guarantee you the technology doesn't want to do that. And if we were to find a way to liberate this technology from the backwards capitalist interests which currently harness it, I'm sure we could understand it much more comfortably and feel good about familiarizing ourselves with it. So, how will these technologies continue to push performance? Well, in the realm of AI and algorithms, I still don't fully know. When so much of how these technologies are being applied in our everyday lives is in this twisted capitalistic fashion, it can get hard to cut through the static and see what we can actually use it for in the field of performance. And I think in order to cut through that, we need to be able to refocus our frustration towards technology and put it towards the forces which are misusing it. Once we stop demonizing the technology and we remove this manufactured divide between STEM and humanities, we can start working together to see what we can do for each other, to make everybody's lives easier, to enrich our lives, to advance our fields together. Annie Dorson said dissatisfaction drives the creative process. I'm inclined to agree that there's always going to be a disconnect between what you do and what you're trying to say. And that's what pushes you to do more. And maybe that dissatisfaction is in your own expression, but I think it's important to look for this dissatisfaction in the world too, and to bring yourself to act on it. We can make as many substacks as we want, go to as many topical plays at Playwrights Horizons as we can, but dissatisfaction absolutely cannot lead to deflection, to just scrolling away and going to the same spaces we feel comforted by. We need to get up and get in our communities, physical and digital, and enact that change. Right now, I'm dissatisfied because I have a lot that needs to get done, and I don't really know how to end this. And I don't know what I'm going to do with these potatoes. Probably fry them in some oil because it's been done a million different ways before, so I'm going to do one more. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that there's something that you find of worth in here. Thank you very much for the fun semester.